Okay. Let's see. I think we should just get going because we've got a busy agenda. We've got a lot to talk about. We've got a lot of people here, a lot of new people. So I'm excited. Let's get going. In fact, though, I'm going to just close my door because I realize I'm excited and talking quite loudly. Be right back. Okay. Well, welcome everybody to Manna Food Center's Breaking Bread for February. My name is Jenna Umbriak. I'm the Director of Programs here at Manna, and my programs team is currently facilitating these gatherings every month, and you'll meet a couple of them in a bit. I want to mention that, first of all, this is being recorded, and you will then be able to watch it on YouTube afterwards. We'll post that eventually, which means that you could also go to YouTube and watch last month's and a few of the months prior that we also have uploaded there for your enjoyment and learning. This is the second of a two-part series, which is somewhat unique for Breaking Bread. Typically, kind of each month stands on its own, but these past 2 months, we wanted to really focus on agriculture and the experience of Black farmers in agriculture. And so we've called this series Systems Seated in Racism Need to Be Uprooted. The system we're talking about in particular is the United States agricultural system. Last month, we talked about the parts of the system that we feel are rooted in racism, and we talked about the history of that. And we then brought it to present day and talked about some of the current experiences. And that was enlightening and inspiring and also, I'm sure, angering and frustrating. This month, we want to be more action-oriented and hopeful. We are talking about the uprooted portion of our title. And our objectives today are first to celebrate the many contributions, and of course we won't be able to celebrate and name them all, but the many contributions of Black individuals and communities to agriculture over the years. And I welcome you, all listeners and participants, to mention your own after we have a brief presentation where we'll bring up some. And then we also want to uplift local efforts to make our agricultural system more inclusive. And so we have a couple of people who we've specifically invited to talk about their work to uproot the racist policies and practices of this system. But we, of course, will welcome all of you to talk about what it is you're doing. So those of you who have been at Breaking Bread before know that we always start with new and good. But we're going to do something a little bit different today in our community sharing portion, which is because we're talking about accomplishments. We're going to ask that you share something, a recent accomplishment that you're really proud of. It can be anything. It can be related to this topic or something else. Or you can just tell us about something you're working on that you hope to accomplish soon. You can put it in the chat if you'd rather share that way. You can raise your hand and I will call on you. Or you can just unmute yourself and take the risk that 10 people might talk over each other at the same time, whatever you prefer. So again, the questions are, what is a recent accomplishment that you're proud of that you'd like to share, or something that you're working on that you hope to accomplish soon that you'd like to share? Yeah, Ben, go for it.
Over last summer when COVID hit, I built a fairly large garden and I was able to give for donation over 1,000 pounds of produce out to food banks in Howard County. I think you're muted.
I am muted. Thank you. Thank you, Ben. I thought Toby was raising her hand, but she's just applauding you, as we all are.
Thank you.
I see that Jackie wrote in the chat, I'm proud that I've been sticking with outdoor exercise, even though I hate the cold. Yeah, I can relate to that for sure. Kendall writes, I hope to soon finish training one of my service guide dogs in training. Very cool. Molly, go for it.
So I want to say, I think it was last December, I was elected president of my sorority on campus. And it's been a lot of work so far, but since I've been elected, I've accomplished a lot for the chapter. And the one thing I hope to continue, I've been working on recently is trying to plan like philanthropy events and events in general with multicultural frats and sororities and another council on campus. So that's the number one thing I've been working on and I'm going to continue to work on.
Nice. Thank you, Molly. I see I passed English 101, says Sam. Congrats, Sam. And Sue says I got my first COVID shot. Excellent. Yeah, David, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. One of the things we're pretty proud of, excuse me, is within our church, one of the things that we've discovered, we are a multiracial church. So based on all the things that have been going on in our society today, the thing that we realized is we had a lot of people feeling a lot of different ways. So one of the things we did was we put out a survey. We tried to get an idea of, where everyone was in regard to how they're handling all of this and all this stuff that has bubbled to the surface. So one of the things we're doing is a series of focus groups and discussions, but we're also putting in education. Now, some of this education deals with some of the tough things that people don't necessarily like to talk about, and that is being brought out in imagery, video, storytelling, to get a variety of people just to understand how people feel, why they feel the way they do. And it's been really eye-opening. There were people who didn't want to participate. They're like, oh, no, I don't want to do that. But then those ones that decided to participate actually begin to spread the word that, man, this is good. This is what we need to understand. And so we're pretty proud of that. This is in the beginning stages, but it's beginning to get traction. We're looking to do more within the church, but also see if we can branch out into communities to talk about this. And that's why I was also very interested in just learning more about the Breaking Bread program, because of the types of conversations that could happen through the use of food, through the use of this type of platform. So anyway, not to be too long-winded, but that's what I'm pretty excited about.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, David. Dolores.
Yes, hi. I'm with the Hunger Task Group of UUCR, the Unitarian Universalist Church of Rockville. And we started a monthly manna food drive with our shared space church, which came to be right before the pandemic. So we really didn't get a chance to meet them. It's the Capitol Rivers Church of the area, which used to be the Church of Christ, and they share our space. And so we came up with an idea that why don't we combine efforts? So we do a drive up monthly food drive for manna now. And it's been a great way to connect with folks from another church who have kind of a different philosophy on things. And it's been a really great experience. And now we just need the weather to start cooperating a little bit better.
Wonderful. Well, we're grateful for that. And I'm glad it's also building community. Thank you, Dolores. I'm seeing some others in the chat. John says, after 25 years away from school, I'm back attending class. Good for you, John. Esubalu, I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but is very excited to welcome a new baby girl in a few weeks. Advanced congratulations. Reggie says, I'm a new employee. I'm so proud to join this company with strong ties to my neighborhood. Reggie, welcome. It's new to Manna. We're glad to have you. Anyone else just in the last couple seconds want to lend their voice to the community sharing? Okay, well, I encourage you to read the rest of them in the chat. They're still coming in. Thank you, everybody, for sharing. And there's one more bit of community sharing before we get into the intros and the presentations, which is that each month at the end of the session, which we'll do again today, so prepare yourselves, we will ask all participants to think about a commitment they're willing to make between now and next month to address the issues that we talked about today or something else related to the root causes of food insecurity. And so does anyone who has made a previous commitment, maybe who was here last month or in a previous Breaking Bread, want to share any progress they've made on their commitment? This is usually the quieter part of community sharing. I'm seeing a lot of new people, so it may be that no one's yet made a commitment and you will sometime in the next 90 minutes. If nothing else, it's a really time to practice being comfortable with silence. Yes, Catherine.
This is probably too honest to be perfectly honest. I completely forgot, and I want to say that, not that I'm proud of that, but that I think there may be others who made commitments 4 weeks ago, and I was endeavoring to get and did finally get a vaccination appointment. So, I think we need to remind ourselves somehow both of our commitments and more broadly of our commitments. So I'll try to do better, but that's why I'm not saying anything.
Honesty is always very welcome. Thank you, Catherine. At one point when when Breaking Bread first started, we were doing it much more internally. We would write down our commitments from time to time because the same thing would happen. We would gather again and think, what did we exactly commit to? So that's very real. And of course, you're not alone in that. Well, if there's no one else, we will just get to it then, so we can start making some commitments for next month. So we have a few people that I'm going to introduce first. I want to first give a shout out to Professor Tope, who's here. And she brought with her wonderful students from the Agricultural Business Management class. So they're all here. Raise your hand, make a little movement if you're from that class. Perfect. We are so glad that you're here. Thank you for joining us. And those of you who you were on last month's Breaking Bread, you remember Tope giving a very inspiring account of her thoughts on agriculture here in the county. So if you did miss that, I highly encourage you to go back and watch that. So we're so glad they're here. I also want to let the following people introduce themselves because you'll be hearing from each of them in a moment. So Fran and Skylar, why don't you two start? Give us a little bit of sense of who you are.
Hi, so my name is Skylar, and Fran and I have been working with MANA for the past couple weeks as dietetic interns. We're with the University of Maryland as well in the dietetic internship program, and I've just been having a lot of fun kind of diving into the research here.
It's been really great to work with the programs team, especially on this project. So thanks for letting us do that.
Sure. So we'll hear from Fran and Skylar in a sec. I also want to introduce also from the MANA team, or let her introduce herself, Agar Bianda. Agar.
Hi everyone. I'm Agar Bianda. I am very glad to be here. Since Monday, I am part of the MANA food team as a community engagement manager. Over the past 10 years, I have been working to engage communities and to strengthen partner skills on advocacy. I hope I will be working collaboratively with you, all of you, to advance MANA missions. Thank you.
Thanks, Agar. We're so glad that you're here. And she's going to be taking a central role in the coordination of Breaking Bread going forward. So today she's observing and thinking about all the things she'd like to do differently next month and the month after that. We're so glad that you're here. And then two individuals that we invited specifically for this conversation, and we're so glad that they're here. Noni Dutton.
Yeah, hi. I'm Nani, and I'm the Deputy Director of Fresh Farm. We run a bunch of farmers markets in the DMV area and some school nutrition education programs, and also food nutrition, programs for SNAP shoppers and WIC FMNP shoppers.
Thank you, Nani. I'm so glad that you're here. And last but not least, we have Meredith Epstein or Epstein.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, Meredith Epstein. I have the great fortune of being Topei's colleague at the Institute of Applied Agriculture. So I run the Sustainable Agriculture program there. I'm a senior lecturer and advisor, and I'm also responsible for running our community learning garden. And this is Ada.
Hello, Ada and Meredith. Thank you both for being here. Catherine, your hand is still up. Is that from earlier? Do you have a question or something you want to? Nope, it's from earlier. Yep.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No worries. All right, and we have a few other MANA team members here. Maybe they'll introduce themselves in the chat so everybody knows who's here. And we will get started. So I'm going to turn it over to Skylar and Fran, who have prepared a presentation to help us celebrate, again, the many contributions of the Black community to agriculture. Take it away, Skylar and Fran.
All right, thank you. So like I said, we were able to do a lot of really interesting research kind of centered around the contributions of Black farmers to agriculture. So that's what our presentation is centered around today. And we wanted to make it as interactive as possible for all of you. So we set it up kind of in a question answer trivia type format. So we're going to ask questions and then give some time if you guys just want to put guesses, or if you know the answer, into the chat. We'll leave some time for that and then kind of dive in to the answer and the information behind it after each question. So our first question is, George Washington Carver was credited for saving the economy of the rural South by coming up with 300 plus ways to use this legume, which made it more marketable. Does anyone know which legume this is? We're already seeing lots of answers roll into the chat. All right. Yeah, so everyone was right on with this one. It was the peanut. And some of the products that he made were not only food products, they included paper, soap, shaving cream, and he even did some experiments with using peanuts in medications. And our next question is, all of the following are Black contributions to agriculture except what? So the answer we're looking for here is which out of the four wasn't a contribution. So the options are the refrigerated truck, potato chips, ice machines, or horse-drawn planters. Just feel free to take a guess.
We got some for 2, 4. A trick question. 1. Some said all were. 2. Alrighty.
All right, so we got lots of good guesses in here. So
our correct answer is that ice machines were the non-contribution. So we'll talk about which ones were. So first we have who is called the King of Cool, who's Frederick McKinley Jones. And he was the one to invent refrigerated trucks, which allow for our current food transportation system to occur, for us to get lots of fresh produce, seasonal produce year round. And then these were later installed into other formats such as boxcars, boats, planes, to get us to where we are today.
Right. So the next contribution was the potato chip, and this was by George Crumb. So we actually read the legend behind this creation, which is really interesting. Apparently George Crumb was a cook at this lake house on Saratoga Lake, and I guess he didn't take criticism well, the story goes, and a customer complained that their potato chips were not crisp enough. So as like a way to come back at them, he sliced the potatoes as thinly as possible and fried them for longer than he knew he should have. And instead of fries, it came out with these really tiny little potato crisps, and the customer ended up loving them. And that's how potato chips began.
And our last contribution from this question was from Henry Blair, and he had invented 2 horse-drawn planters, both the cotton and corn planter. And you can see a little visual of what I believe this is the cotton planter you can see on their screen. And he was actually the second African-American to receive a US patent on an invention. And these also created opportunities for efficiency since it was able to limit labor and time needed to harvest and plant. Our next question is, what female former sharecropper started the Farm Freedom Cooperative to empower Black sharecrop farmers? This one's a little bit of a trickier one, and just a reminder that sharecroppers are tenant farmers who paid their expenses for land that they used through crops. Give a little bit longer for this one since we had a blank answer for this one. But if anyone knows it, feel free to shout out. We'll give a second. All right, I figured this one might be a little bit tricky, but I'm going to introduce to you Fannie Lou Hammer. Oh, awesome. We got 2 people who got it. Woo! Go Cynthia and Jackie. Fannie Lou Hammer was a former sharecropper, and she was able to, through her experience, learn the injustice that existed in this system, and wanted to create a way to empower Black sharecroppers and sharecroppers in general out of this oppressing system. And so by doing this, she created the Freedom Farm Cooperative, and that empowered Black farmers to help establish freedom from white landowners that they were working underneath. And one of her programs that was within this cooperative is called the Pig Project, and it's where they gave families a piglet, and they raised this piglet and breeded it, and then from the offspring gave that further down to other members of the cooperative, so that they were able to all have meat and be able to sustain themselves off of this. And it continues the cycle of helping each other. And she's called the pioneer of food justice, since that was her program. Our next question is, George Washington Carver made all of the following contributions except for which one? So invented peanut butter, initiated crop rotation, developed multiple dye colors from soil, or took part in creating a peanut butter rubber replacement. We got some for 2, 3.
Got lots of guesses rolling in. All right. So The answer was actually 1. He did not create peanut butter. That was a little bit of a tricky one because he did so much with peanuts, but he did a lot of other things too, and peanut butter was actually not one of his peanut inventions. So in terms of crop rotation, he actually did come up with the idea to alternate cotton with legumes, which was typically peanuts, for better soil quality. In terms of creating dyes from soil, he created 30 different dyes from agricultural products. So a lot of these were from soil, some were from roots and seeds found within the soil as well. And the peanut-based rubber replacement was actually during World War I. He was asked to work along with Henry Ford to try and create a replacement for rubber when supplies were low during the war.
And just on the crop rotation, when I saw someone saying it's been practiced in centuries, that is true, but in the South particularly, he kind of reinitiated that for that particular setting. So good catch on that one.
Our next question is, Booker T. Washington believed that what was the key to African American success? This one might be a little trickier as well, so we'll give some time.
So education and ownership of land.
Okay.
Education, hard work in their field.
Yeah, those are all great guesses. What he said was education, so good job. Some of you guys did get that, and every other guess was really good too. So Booker T. Washington actually provided agricultural education to Black farmers under the Second Morrill Act of 1890. So some background on this act, it included this stipulation that African Americans were to be included in the United States land grant university higher education system. So prior to this, in the first Morrill Act, they were discriminated, but being included in the second act gave them more access to education. So this allowed the creation of farmers' cooperations, which then decreased the dependency of Black farmers on white landowners by having this education.
All right, this is our last question for today. Joseph Lee was the creator of several machines related to what common carbohydrate source in our diet? Go ahead and guess on this one. Wheat. More for wheat.
Mm-hmm.
Corn.
Yeah, all really good guesses.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It is related to wheat, so that's good. So bread is what his machines mainly revolved around. He created a lot of different bread machines. One of them allowed for faster, cheaper, more sanitary bread making. And so that's crucial to our current fast creation and transportation and distribution of food today. Obviously, having sanitary is always good. And we just wanted to conclude our portion before we move on with a quote. And this is from Leah Penningham, and she's a co-founder of Soul Fire Farm, which is in New York. And its goal is to work towards ending racial injustice within the food system. And so she said, our food comes from the earth, from the soil, from the land. And if we don't own any and we don't control any of it, and we don't really have a voice in the food system. And so I think it's really important that we continue to have conversations like these and uplift and listen to Black voices specifically in the agricultural system. So thanks so much for listening to our aspect.
Yeah, thank you. We learned a lot researching this, so we hope that you guys were able to learn a lot from this as well.
Thank you, Fran and Skylar. I certainly learned a lot. It looks like from the chat, others did too. And yeah, we'll endeavor to share this on social media. And as I've mentioned before, this whole presentation will be recorded on Mana's YouTube channel to also check out. But I do want to take, of course, Skylar and Fran are fantastic researchers, but I'm sure they didn't unearth every single thing that Black farmers, Black individuals did to contribute to the food system. And we have some food experts on the call today. So I just want to give a few minutes and let anyone who wants to uplift something that wasn't shared that they know of as a contribution that is important to them. You can do so in the chat, or you can unmute yourself, raise your hand. So I see Reggie sharing some of his own knowledge and experiences around learning about George Washington Carver's many contributions, as well as Booker T. Washington's home. Reggie, do you want to unmute and share anything more about that?
Yeah. Like I said, I just spent a lot of my summers on campus of Tuskegee University, and my mother being from Tuskegee. I mean, Booker T. Washington's house is right across the street from the George Washington Carver Museum on campus. So our grandmother used to send us to the museum every day to learn something. She wouldn't let us come back in the house until we learned something. So I really appreciate the young ladies for pointing that stuff out, because it's been a minute since I've seen that information, because I knew, but I've forgotten that he didn't create peanut butter, because that's one of the misnomers about George Washington Carver.
Perfect. Thank you, Reggie. I love that assignment that your grandmother gave you. Anyone else have anything like that to add? Okay. Well, we'll move on, but I want to bring up again the quote that Fran and Skylar shared, and just the understanding that we need to, I think it helps to uplift all these contributions, and also at the same time recognize that there was, as we talked a lot about last month, a lot of oppression, and we need to make sure, and a lot of places where Black voices were not included in the process and are still not included. And so we look forward now to what we can do to make these spaces much more inclusive of Black voices. And we want to bring Meredith and Nani in to share what they're doing. And I have a few questions to pose to them to get the conversation started. We'll open it up to if our participants have any other questions they'd like to add. So I see Noni on my screen. Oh, there you are, Meredith. Okay, great. This is the first panel I've done virtually, so I just want to make sure I've got both of you in my sights. So the first question is just if you could tell us a little bit about what ways currently you're trying to uproot the seeds of systemic racism in your own work at Fresh Farm, or in academia, or in farming generally. Meredith, why don't we start with you?
Sure, and thank you again so much for having me. I do want to start by acknowledging that I'm a white female. I'm here to speak about the seeds of systemic racism, and I will do that from my perspective of working within the land grant system in higher education. And I do want to thank our two dietetic interns for mentioning the moral acts, actually. And I did want to acknowledge those, that the reason that the University of Maryland College Park exists, and all the other what we call land grant institutions throughout the country, is that in 1862, so sorry, definitely being a teacher here, giving a little history lesson, but in 1862, the Morrill Land Grant Act, it was the first of three, it basically involved that there were, for every state senator that a state had, if that state was part of the Union, so this is definitely a political move, if that state was part of the Union, for every senator that they had, they would receive 30,000 acres of land on which to found an agricultural college. And that was meant to deliver, teaching of agricultural and mechanical arts and sciences. And it was meant to be accessible for the common man. And that meant the common white man. And so states who were in the Union received that benefit, and states that were not in the Union were essentially punished by being left out of that. So it was a political and economic strategy, a war strategy, essentially. So when the 1862 land grants were started, they could either build schools on that land that they were given, or they could sell the land and then use the money to start schools. Those schools were intended for, like I said, young white men. And so the systems that created those schools and nurtured those schools and perpetuated the existence of those schools were built from a white male perspective, culture. And it was not until 1890 that there was a second round of this act that stated that unless a land grant university could prove that race was not a criteria for admission, that they had to start a second school, an 1890 land grant institution. They didn't have 30,000 acres to give at that point, so it was just money, and not necessarily a comparable quantity of funds. But that's where University of Maryland Eastern Shore came from, and other what we now call HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. And then it wasn't until the 90s that occurred again to create tribal land grant schools for Native Americans. So I teach and I work at the College Park campus, one of those 1862 institutions that was, as I said, intended for white men. And it has taken a lot of work over many years and changes to many policies to have the campus be the diverse place that it is today. But we still see the perpetuation of so many, intergenerational issues like wealth gaps and other forms of trauma on our campus today. So it is a predominantly white institution. It always has been. And so the work that I'm doing is I'm really working as a teacher, but also trying to work with the administration in our College of Agriculture and Natural Resources to really evaluate how we teach, what we teach, how we can support students, and how we can recruit students more equitably. And so that's the perspective that I'm bringing here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Meredith. Nani, I'm looking at you.
Great. Yeah, I think, thank you, Meredith. That was great. And I think, like Meredith, I should preface this by saying I'm only half Black, and I'm speaking about systemic racism. I certainly do not present as Black. I think right now I'm studying Spanish on Duolingo because I get so embarrassed every time I walk into a Mexican restaurant and they start speaking Spanish at me. And I say, I'm really sorry. I wish I spoke Spanish. I do not. So that's where I'm learning. And I would say that with Fresh Farm, it was founded in 1997, and our biggest farmers market is Dupont Circle. But that farmers market didn't have a Black vendor until 2015. And then we didn't even have a Black farmer until 2 years ago. So I think Fresh Farm has really played a poor role in sort of addressing systemic racism in its history and with its resources and power as like a farmers market operator in this region. And so we built a entirely new application system this year to even ask the question, like, how do you identify? Because our previous system didn't have any way of asking that. And then including more people in these evaluations to sort of understand, like, what are the factors for these vendors that are applying, where do they come from, how can we make farmers markets more inclusive. So it has been really a 8-month process so far. And we're not even sure it's going to work very well, but I think our commitment is to try to do better every year. I think when we ask ourselves, like, hey, what's enough to address systemic racism? I think the answer is, like, there's no ceiling to what we could do. We can just, like, keep trying to be better each year at it. And so that's currently what we're working on, and hope to, I want this to be more of a virtue signaling of, like, hey, we're changing our process, and be rather like, hey, here are the results of the process, rather than we're doing a process. But we will, I think the results will determine whether or not we are moving the noodle, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really important point. There is really no ceiling to what we can do. I'm curious how you each would describe, the importance of this work and what is motivating. Either you can talk about it from a personal standpoint, and also maybe from an organizational standpoint or an institutional standpoint. Meredith, we can go over to you.
Sure. I think for me on a personal level, and I feel so much responsibility as a white person to do this work. And a part of that for me, again, personally, is I can see injustices firsthand, even in my neighborhood with my friends, and then taking it to work is a whole nother level. But feeling a personal sense of responsibility as a white person to do something, to do anything, and that a critical part of that be that the people who are so okay. This is a lot harder than I thought it would be. So it's personally really important to me that non-white individuals, non-white people, are not burdened in more than they already are, simply in their existence, to do the work of teaching their white peers. And so when I take that personal sense of responsibility to the workplace, and I think about why it matters that we do this, just more beyond the that it's just the right thing to do. It's my motivation is my students, and not just my current students, but the future students. I'm always thinking of who's coming next, and wanting there to be equal opportunities. I'm sorry. Wanting there to be equal and equitable, because those are two different things, opportunities for future students. That, if we talk about what is this ideal we're all working toward, where, it's a future that's full of justice and has dismantled many of these systems, is it just that we're looking toward a future where, say, the population of the University of Maryland equally reflects the basic demographic breakdown of the United States? I don't think that's necessarily the ideal. I think that there has been so much trauma and injustice over so many generations that it's about creating more opportunities for, I'm so sorry for all the crying in the background. It's very distracting for me at the moment, but yeah, to do even better than that. I want my students to feel like the university and our classrooms are safe spaces for their learning. I want them to feel like they equally matter and are invited to these spaces. I want them to feel that the resources we have for them, which very much includes financial aid and sources of scholarships, are there for everyone in an equal way, and that your various, the intersections of your identity are not a consideration that could potentially harm you or create a barrier for you. And that's, sorry, last thing, and then I'll mute myself. And for us training students in agriculture, I think that it's so important that we are recognizing that the industry into which these students are going in the United States is 100% built upon and has only been successful to the degree that it has because of the exploitation of people of color through their enslavement and the theft of their land. And that our university itself exists on what is stolen land from the Piscataway people. So that preparing students to enter that industry, it's not only taking care of them while they're students, but it is making sure that when they get into that industry, that it is a safe and equitable place for them to thrive. And I'll stop there. I could go on, but I'll let Nani take a turn.
Thanks for sharing, Meredith. I think personally, like, I'm motivated by my dad. So my dad, Black, is born. My dad had me at 50. So for my age, my dad was really old. So he's born in 1939 in Louisiana. And I went to public school in Baltimore City, and I think Baltimore City public schools aren't the best. And so I was mostly a truant in high school, but I was into lots of things outside of school, like electronics and robotics, et cetera. And so in high school, I don't remember exactly when, this is going to be I don't think I've ever shared this story publicly, but I was getting into electronics, and my dad kind of sat me down with an old journal of his and to talk about electronics and schematics and diagrams, et cetera. And he said to me, it was like, this page here, this is a schematic for the bomb I was going to put in a suitcase in Louisiana courthouse when I went to register to vote. They tore up my voting papers, and he said I was going to go back and I was going to put the suitcase down, and then I was going to walk out. He ended up not doing that, and it's a little more intense of a person than I was, but he ended up moving to Spain for 10 years because he said he needed to get out of the South because he was going to either end up dead or in jail. And I have not had anywhere near that kind of experience, or anywhere near, like, I would say, the Black experience in this country. Sorry. But I think it does motivate me in the work that I do. My dad's dead now, and when my dad died, my mom, who's white, took this spiral into racism and Trump support, and so I have a very weird parental makeup there. But yeah, I think that motivates me in my life and work, et cetera. And I think on an organizational level, I think Fresh Farm is motivated by some of our Black vendors who rightfully kind of reached out and said, hey, look, y'all can do better, and you're not. And so, and that's tough to hear, and that's wounding. But I think part of working to combat systemic racism is to accept the uncomfortable conversations, accept the pain and the hurt, and keep doing better. Not to take things personally, and just to move forward. So, that's tough, but that's what we're doing.
Thank you for sharing that. Thanks for both your candor and your vulnerability. It's a challenging topic to talk about, and especially so if you have personal connections. So next, I just want to give you each a chance to talk about, you've been talking, I think, a little bit in terms of the motivation about some challenges that this work presents, but also what's been supportive, what's been a source of hope for you both.
Thank you, Noni. I don't want to be redundant, but the source of hope for me is again my students. It's just amazing to have a student who will start the program and maybe not be entirely sure what direction they want to go in, and may come from in several cases, fairly isolated backgrounds in very diverse ways. We do get students who are, traditional 18-year-olds starting college right out of high school, but we also have really a really diverse student population that ranges all the way up to like age 85, former military and all kinds of career changers. And to have all those people in one space and learning from each other and their diverse experiences, and just being able to witness a classroom where students are willing to share vulnerable experiences, just like Noni is right now. And it's really humbling to me, and it gives me hope that we can get to a better place. I really, to the challenging part of your question, it is, talk about working from the inside of the system. It can be very challenging top down to actualize change, especially in a predominantly white institution. And so I see a lot of that hope and a lot of that momentum coming from the students. And, at the end of the day, I hope the university never forgets that they're there for students, and not necessarily for athletics income. That we are there to foster that experience. And I think classrooms are a really intimate place to start to have these vulnerable conversations and to recognize and celebrate all of the wonderful things that diversity brings to that space. So yeah, I'll again say my students.
Sorry, Jen, could you reframe the question? I had the original questions, but I think.
Yeah, for sure. I just combined two of the questions I gave you before, or before we, by email, sorry. One was talking about the challenges you've encountered, and the other half was just talking about what support you found, what's made you feel hopeful or strengthened in the work.
Yeah, I think it's challenging because there's so many pieces to any organization, any work, from the board to the director level to all the levels on down, and partners that you work with and permits that you get and grants, et cetera. And so I think all of those pieces need to take racial justice seriously for it to work. And then you run into these roadblocks and then have to work with them or against them or call them out, et cetera. And it's difficult and it's challenging, but necessary. So I think, yeah, it's kind of, and it's also sometimes surprising where the roadblocks come from. Sometimes they surprise you in their challenge, et cetera, where you thought something might be easier, and then you realize that someone is really not as quote unquote woke as you thought they might have been. So that's tough. But in places that I think with progress actually, or things that feel supportive or kind of help me in the work, is actually when Dodo Farms started coming to markets, and Tobe can talk about this. Purchasing from them every week has helped me a lot. I would say that for someone that runs farmers markets, I'm actually not very good of a cook at all, and I will usually just eat kind of handfuls of raw things and don't really have a good sense of what to make. But when I go to buy vegetables every week from Dodo, Nee will tell me, like, here's what you gotta buy and here's what you do with it. And like that has sort of helped me. They're not coming to markets in the winter because they're building some high tunnels. They got some new land and etc. So I've eaten very poorly over the past couple of months. So I'm excited for them to return. And yeah, but that each week is like I've been eating better. I mean, they're just amazing to see at markets. Like Toby's here, obviously, but Nee, who's not on the call, is the sweetest, most welcoming, inviting person who I think truly cares about every customer he has and wants them to eat healthy and eat well, and I think grow like the best, most nutritious products for them.
Great. Well, I'm seeing a lot of our students are having to go on to classes at 1 o'clock. Thanks to those of you who were able to hang out, but thanks to those of you who came for what part that you could. Lastly, before we move on to more community discussion, I'll just ask Meredith and Nani, what would you like to say to other people to encourage them to get involved in creating more inclusion in the food system? Some words of advice, wisdom, or encouragement.
Well, I will say I do I do feel kind of like an imposter sitting here as a white person giving advice. So I would want to say that to read the words and listen to the words of folks of color who like have, there's just so many wonderful books and podcasts out there, to listen to the words of the folks who this is their lived experience, and the expertise that, sadly has to come along with that. And I've gotten a ton from Ibram X. Kendi in particular. He wrote How to Be an Anti-Racist, Stamped from the Beginning. We even have like a baby book by him called Anti-Racist Baby. And it's his works have really put a lot of this into the perfect perspective for me to, be able to digest and reflect on and then act upon. And I can tie that back to your previous question about some of the challenges. I think one of the biggest challenges I've seen in even like suggesting to my department that everyone make a diversity, equity, and inclusion commitment in their syllabus that they share with class at the beginning of the semester every year, or some of the higher level administration that we're starting to do this really important diversity, equity, inclusion work, but it feels very very lip servicey at this moment, is that I think one of the most important things we can do is to admit and understand when we are having racist thoughts or having made a racist statement or something like that, and understanding that the opposite of that is to be anti-racist, that there is no middle ground that's kind of a neutrality zone of just like, oh, I'm not racist. That doesn't exist. That you really are. It is a dichotomy, right? We're either racist or anti-racist. And so I encourage everyone to read Ibram X. Kendi's works, to really understand that dichotomy and how you can be actively anti-racist and bring that to the work of your institutions.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned earlier, but having difficult conversations and being capable of receiving difficult conversations, I think, is important. It's easy to avoid the tough conversation when you see something that doesn't sit right or doesn't sit with you or is not anti-racist. I think the easiest thing for most people is to stay silent, and the silence is the problem. And on the other side of that too, to be on the receiving end, to also be open to criticism, open to change, because there's with anti-racist work, I think there is not a ceiling in ourselves also to be more inclusive and understand the lived experiences of others, et cetera. And so being open to those difficult conversations, I think, is important.
For sure. Yeah, thank you both so much for answering those questions, and again, for your candor and your vulnerability. We have one question so far in the chat, and I'm just gonna unspotlight you both so that we can have more of I'm gonna try to anyway, community discussion. And so, Ian, are you still here? You want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yep, it's a quick question. My department is very, very not diverse, primarily due to interest. I'm an animal science major, and the reason I ask this question relates to the fact that my department is, I believe, approximately 90% female, so males are already a minority. And it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 to 85% white people, essentially. There are very few Black people. I can count them on my hand. I know of 2 Black males in my department who are undergraduates. The graduate students are a little bit more diverse, but they're from a smaller pool. So I know of 1 Black male graduate student and 1 Black female graduate student. I have worked for a professor as a TA before for a very large introductory class in this department. But my main question relates to, especially because I want to go on as a graduate student, what can I do to help people feel more included? And help students who may feel excluded simply due to the demographics of my department.
Great. Yeah, and as Tope is putting her hand up, I want to say I don't want the burden to fall on Meredith and Nani to answer each of these. I think we can collectively provide feedback to whomever wants to bring a question or a comment. So Tope, did you want to say something?
Yes, I wanted to answer that question because I came to the United States about 20 years ago as a foreign student and as the only person from Africa in my class. And I went to school, even though I went to school in Atlanta, I went to school in a very white school. I went to Emory. So it was a very difficult experience for me at first. But one of the things that helped me is people who were not like me, who offered themselves as allies. For example, you can see me, I wear hijab. So apart from being Black and being a woman and being in this school with a lot of people who didn't look like me, I also dressed up this way at a time when it was just 9/11 and everybody would look like a woman who dressed this way as a terrorist. So one day somebody told me that, perhaps you should remove your headscarf so that you can get a job. And I was very confused. I didn't know what to do. I was just really confused. Then I was just walking on the corridors in school one day and I saw this guy who, of course, looked not anything like me, wasn't African in any way. And I said, is it true that in America, I won't get a job because I'm Black and I am wearing a hijab? Not only did he tell me in very plain terms that was nonsense, he said, I'm going to do 2 things for you. I'm going to introduce you personally to the assistant dean, who is going to tell you about what will stop you and not stop you from getting a job. And then I'm going to ask my siblings to buy you colors of your hijab in every color, so that when you go out, you would match. And then he introduced me to the dean, assistant dean, who was a white gay man. And he said to me, no, that's nonsense. Just make sure you match. Make sure you don't look mismatched, and you're going to be okay. And those two people who didn't look like me, who weren't even female, who weren't Black, who weren't Muslim, made my experience in America just beautiful. So I think the way to do this is to be an ally in the true sense of the word. And while I'm speaking, I just want to say that Meredith and Noni, thank you so much. Like, both of you on the screen made me proud, made me happy, because you're both my allies. Meredith is my ally in school. Noni is the ally at the farmer's market. There was a day we were in the farmer's market and we wanted to retain a new space that we had. And then we asked one of the DuPont Circle staff, and we said, we like this new space. Can we stay here? And the lady said, oh, that's Noni's decision. And my husband said, oh, well, if it's Noni's decision, that means we're going to stay here because he likes us. Because he comes to buy all kinds of produce from us every week. Like, I don't know any other farmer that he does that to, but he comes with, like, just buys a lot. So, to be that ally. And, in terms of Meredith, I see her taking the lead in diversity initiatives. And I'm like, this is it, because I don't want to be the one to be taking the lead on an issue about racism. It should be somebody who wants to help. It can't be me looking like an angry Black woman. And I remember when I went to UMD for my interview, and they asked me, why should they hire me? And I said, I think I'm qualified, but I also look at all of you, I don't see a Black person. And I think this faculty should look like the body, the student body. So I think that being that ally is the best thing, is the single biggest thing that you can do in any situation that you are. Just be an ally.
Okay.
Thanks,
Did you want to respond, Noni?
No, I appreciate that. And I would say, yeah, like Dodo Farms is the only farm I go to say, like, that's where I get my vegetables now. And so I've had to make do with a few different farms over the winter, but we'll be back soon.
I'd like to follow up on Tope's response, Ian, that I'd like to suggest that, and I'm sure you think about this too, that it's not that there aren't young men who are interested in animals, and it's not that there aren't people of color who like animals. I think it's much more that they don't feel like it's a space that is for them. And I can personally tell you, having had many students as advisees who went into the animal sciences and from a diversity of identities, I've heard that firsthand from students, that the animal science department or this department or that department on campus doesn't feel like a space for them. And so, it really comes back to what Tope was talking about in a couple of respects, that students, stepping up to be allies and endeavoring to create safe spaces like that certainly has to be done. Let's come back to the concept of, I always try to come back to the concept of, nothing about us without us. So that needs to be an inclusive process, but also reflecting, what does the faculty look like? How do they represent? And so that may be more of an issue of hiring, the hiring process, and whether or not the university at large feels like a safe space for people to be employed as as faculty and staff. So I think that's a multi-layered issue.
David, I saw your hand up. Did you want to add something or ask a new question or comment?
Well, I tell you, there's so many things I want to say, And there's so many. This has been very rich. Noni and Meredith, now coming from I'm just going to put it out there. I'm an old Black man, so I've experienced different things over the years, and I think it's in another conversation of even understanding the difference in racism now and the difference in racism when I was coming up young. But I think more importantly, I want to applaud both of you and Meredith. One thing in COVID, everybody is going to be with kids, so I don't want you to feel ever again that you can't allow your daughter to kind of do what she does naturally, because you're holding both ends up, and I applaud you. It's excellent.
Thank you.
But I think the other thing though is I did some work when I was at Howard at the College of Medicine. I was on a HIV/AIDS grant, and the whole thing was to be able to treat minorities living with HIV. The clinicians that were treating them obviously were white or a different ethnicity than especially those African Americans living with HIV. So the point was to allow them to connect to those patients, because there's no way that patient was coming back to that clinic if there wasn't a connection, because I'm sharing intimate information about how I got the disease, and you can just imagine how what that connection needed to be to allow them to be more comfortable in actually sharing this. And the point I'm trying to get at is in regard to Ian's question, you've got to, for the people that are there, and I think you brought up a great point, inequity in hiring in the university in the first place. We could start there. But the second thing, for the people that are there, like yourself and others, got to connect. And there was something that we call cultural competency. That was a buzzword. And cultural competency is not enough. Then they came out with cultural fluency. And that was a little deeper. It allowed me to be a lot more free flowing in my interaction. But really what it boiled down to was being able to learn from one another and being willing to hear the anger, hear the hurt without recoiling. Now, this is not just in university settings, but I'm finding that is the issue that folks that are white, when you think about it, if they really want, I think I really appreciate what you said, Meredith, about, okay, how really, in essence, you were talking about how far am I willing to go? I mean, we got to be able to have the conversations that really make us uncomfortable. And that's where a student will begin to connect. And you may be the only one, Ian, you may be one of a handful, but it starts there, because let's face it, University of Maryland or wherever, we look at, those hiring practices are not going to happen fast enough to make a difference with those students that are in there now, that are coming in even in the next couple of years. So what are we going to do with the faculty that's actually there right now, and actually be able to say, okay, how am I going to make a difference in this student that comes in, like you said, Meredith, I don't even know if I should even be here or if this opportunity is really for me. So, I just want to encourage you. And that's one of the things we did with those clinicians, as I was saying at Howard, was the clinicians had to learn to connect with the patient in ways that they were not comfortable with. It was tough, but it happened. And, and that deals with all the health disparities. But again, I'm sorry, I don't mean to take so much time, but I really appreciate being here. This is awesome.
We appreciate you being here, David. Thank you for all of those contributions. I just want to mention, I mentioned Tope earlier, but I didn't say thank you for really helping us plan these last two sessions. And in this one in particular, helping us identify people that she specifically wanted to uplift, because and I don't want to speak too much for you, Tope, but I know in both the example of Fresh Farm and with your colleague Meredith, there were specific instances that you wanted to uplift. And I want to mention that we did also invite a couple of representatives from Rose's, from the restaurant group that owns Rose's Luxury, and a few others in DC. And I don't know, Tope, and they couldn't make it today, unfortunately, but do you want to share that example as another one to add?
Yeah. So first of all, Jenna, thank you so much for involving me in this and for even creating this platform. I'm just, first of all, from the last time I was here, I was in awe. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I know my students who came are going to have a lot of them sent me direct messages about how this was good for them. I think this was a conversation that I know you were nervous to have, but you did a great job. And to your interns, oh my goodness, I could not believe it. Like, the ideas of the quizzes, I learned so much. I was sending screenshots to my intern. I'm like, these are things that I didn't know. So thank you so much for creating that space. When we were thinking about who will speak today, I wanted to bring people who were allies, because sometimes I feel like people who are not Black find this uncomfortable, especially when people say, oh, you are appropriating something, or you're, standing in a space that you don't own. But I think that without all of us working together, we're not going to combat this issue. And so I wanted to bring somebody who I know is doing good work in academia. And I wanted to also bring somebody who made, this whole farmers market experience just mind-blowingly easy for us. But there was also a third group that couldn't make it here today. And that is the Seth of the Rose Luxury Group. They own a bunch of restaurants in DC. And one of the things they did that just blew my mind last season was that they decided that their restaurants in DC will buy from us. They would create menus based on what we had. And so these people began to buy, and it was the middle of the season, and we only have 1-2 acres, so it's not like we have a lot. But they decided that they would ask us on Thursdays, what do you have this weekend? And whatever we have, they would come, they would order it in bulk, and they would create amazing stuff in their luxury restaurants and then name them Dodo Farms XYZ. So this put us in such a good light. And it was just, I teach agricultural business, and I'm from a part of Nigeria where we love money. So for me, I'm always thinking about the business of it. And when people tell me, how do we help Black farmers? I say, buy from us. And so these people have taken it to another level. And they've just told us that next season, when we come back in this spring, they want to add 2 or 3 more restaurants to the thing. So I always tell people who are not people of color, that for every 1 person who buys from a Black farmer, there are 9 who wouldn't. So this is not some affirmative action story. This is the truth. There are people who would walk past us in DuPont Circle who would not even look, because all they could see is the color. So when you stop by, whether in DuPont, Silver Spring, or wherever, you are making up for the revenue that we've lost just because we showed up in this world with more pigmentation. So thank you.
And we did get a nice note from Seth Wells, who was regretful that he couldn't come, and he just mentioned how much he loved working with Dodo Farms and underscored that commitment to get more of their food into many of his restaurants. So other comments or questions in the last couple of minutes before we ask for commitments? Anything else that's on people's minds from this conversation? Okay. Well, Meredith, did you want to say something?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
So our hope today was that we could provide you with some examples historically of, and we probably just scratched the surface of the contributions of, in this case, we're talking specifically about the food system of Black individuals, but of course, there's so much history that we were not, most of us were not told, and we don't get to celebrate because we don't know it. And so we hope we gave you some examples today to just pique your curiosity to learn more about that. And then examples of people in our current time who are doing our best to make the spaces more inclusive, to add representation where there isn't enough currently, to make the choice in each moment to be an ally, and then to make that choice again in the next moment, and to make sure that we all understand how systemic racism impacts us and how it manifests in our own personal lives and in our institutions and our organizations. So I'm going to turn to each of you as I promised I would at the onset, so don't seem surprised. Is there some commitment that you're prepared to make now, between now and the next time we meet, which will be March 17th, I believe? Something, it can be small or large, it can be personal or organizational, something that you're willing to do to make spaces more inclusive, perhaps, or however you interpret the getting to the root causes and uprooting systemic racism in your spaces. And you can put them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and share with the group. Reggie, go for it. Oh, you're still, yep.
There we go. I'm sorry. One thing that I would like to do, and I believe I shared with you, with your dietitian background, is that I want to get the word out to other people and myself to eat more healthier and to incorporate better nutrition into your diet. I shared with you, but in 2018, I had a quadruple bypass and my whole diet has changed and I've been forced to eat healthier. So now when I go to the grocery store, I actually read the labels of stuff that I buy instead of pushing everything into the cart. So one thing I would just like to do is just, knowledge is key. If we can find a way to, give that knowledge about, maybe Black farmers or Black information to other people and nutritional values, and then implement it as far as utilizing those farms, or even if you can get land or show someone, hey, I have a farm, but I need more land, I'm all for that information, just spreading it. So I'm going to try to do that myself. And it's going to start with me eating better.
Thank you, Reggie.
Mm-hmm.
I just see a few things in the chat. So Meredith shared a link to white supremacy culture and organizations. I'm definitely going to check that out. Thank you for sharing that, Meredith. And we'll try to find ways to share that out. Sue says, you may not know who you've been an ally for. I've had students thank me years later for something I've done for them that I was completely unaware. And Noni says, I commit to bringing the results of our new market application process and open it up for feedback, discussion, suggestions, criticism. Excellent. Thank you. Skylar or Fran, your square has your hand up.
We'll both go right now. So,
okay.
Kind of like we said, we really only were able to scratch the surface in our presentation today, and I learned so much just researching for those 6 questions. So with kind of the food system and everything being so intertwined with nutrition in our field, that research is definitely something I want to commit to do even more of on my own, just to be more knowledgeable in that sense, because I think a lot of people in our field don't really know that side of it, which it's just not covered as much. So that's something I want to do. And then also what the book that Meredith mentioned about how to be an anti-racist, I haven't read that one yet. So I definitely will be ordering that book and hopefully starting to read that within the next month in my free time.
And I also want to continue my research. I was working in the spirit of looking all these things up for our presentation today. I had found some just general and specifically related to our field of study, and not just in relation to Black communities, but also Indigenous communities and many others. And I'm working on just kind of making a quick summary so people don't necessarily have to take the time to read it, but posting that on LinkedIn and continuing to share in that kind of platform, because I think that's a platform that often gets skipped out on, I would say. And I'd also like to read that book, so maybe borrowing it from Skylar as well.
Thank you both. And thanks again for your presentation earlier. I do want to recognize, so I see Simone just wrote in the chat a little bit about if your food is not your medicine will be your food, which of course is a favorite adage of us in the dietetic community. But I want to recognize Simone. She was with Breaking Bread from the very onset when we started this in a previous board member's home, this plan to have conversations across lines of difference so that we could create new solutions to the problem of food insecurity. And so it's nice to see you back, Simone, from a little hiatus. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. I'm overjoyed, and I'm not going to show my face right now because I've been crying. It's good to see you all's faces. I miss you, your family.
Well, we look forward to seeing you or just seeing your name, hearing your voice in upcoming Breaking Breads. Thanks again.
Stay blessed.
And I want to recognize, just because Tope said, thank you, Jenna, for creating this space. Well, I didn't create it. It's not unique to me. I do want to give a shout out to my colleague, Angela Whitmall, who really started this space. And it is a pleasure and an honor for my team to take it up and for Agar to create this space for all of us in the future. I hope that each of you will consider attending again. Again, we do this every third Wednesday of the month, currently 12 to 1:30. We'll keep it virtual for as long as we have to, but we do look forward to a time when we can talk about these things across the same table. In the meantime, we'll continue posting these on YouTube, share them widely. I'll make a commitment to make sure that we share Skylar and Fran's presentation on social media, and also I'll send it, right? I can send it out to you, Tope, directly, so you can share with any of your students that you might want to. And I think with that, unless anyone has any final thoughts, we'll wrap up and just say thank you so much for coming. And thank you so much to our speakers, Noni, Meredith. Thank you very much. Take good care.